CIA on her neighbor who was one of the hijackers, and they did nothing there as well. This seems to be the norm again and again and again, that at least some of these people were protected at the highest levels. The al-Bayoumi story has now gotten out there into the mainstream, but this wasn't really new. It's, again, something I reported on.
It's been confirmed to me through FBI friends at the highest level. Two of the terrorists in 9/11 were on the CIA payroll. Two of them. So were on the U.S. CIA payroll.
Again, when you look at that, you know, you've had people like Richard Clark come out, talk about al-Bayoumi. We certainly have the Saudi funding. If you believe the bin Laden stories, there's a lot more connections to Pakistan than there are on the named places of war on terror, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. Especially when you talk about the funding prior to 9/11 with General Mahmoud Ahmed out of the ISI. And when you talk about the Central Intelligence Agency, the ISI, the CIA, MI6, they've kind of worked hand in hand since the 70s. I also put that in there. And the Mujahideen bin Laden network in Russia.
Well, guys, I'm here joined with Jason Bermas, who you just saw in that brief clip. Let me just bring my mic over here. And we're going to talk about the official story of 9/11, because I think it really starts with that. The government has this idea that 19 Arab hijackers took a bunch of all four of those planes, got past security with some box cutters, and hijacked the planes and flew them into all these, sensitive targets, including the Pentagon, like an hour and a half after they knew the first flight was hijacked. So that they would have been on alert and had known about this. This is the military command center. We had to have known about this. All the people who were in charge that day, again, it seems that they failed us on 9/11, and we need new hearings. Do you think Trump will come through on that, Jason?
I don't know. I'm one of those guys that, for me, I've been politically homeless forever. You know this. I've never bought into the right or left paradigm. At the same time, I do think Trump was a disruptor in many ways. Right now, when we're looking at the RFK, MLK, and JFK stuff, I mean, we still don't have all the JFK stuff. If you've actually been paying attention to that, there have been a couple of smaller releases. One was like, I think, 16 PDF files and then several hundred. So I don't even know the drip on that. I would say this.
Well, I'll tell you about RFK. I know something really juicy about that is that there's two guys that were involved in the investigation who were in LAPD who were CIA, Manny Pina and Hank Hernandez. And both these guys were CIA. And this was going to come up for a reinvestigation. They were going to have the Justice Department in California bring this case open, because this is not like JFK where whoever was on the grassy knoll got away. They didn't no one got a clear picture. They confiscated everyone's camera footage from the grassy knoll who caught what anything that could have happened there. And who knows where that footage, the Beverly Oliver film, the Gordon Arnold film, all that stuff's gone. So the JFK one is a little different. RFK, we have the smoking gun. I mean, we literally have Thane Eugene Caesar's pistol. His tie was ripped off and pulled to the floor by Bobby Kennedy, who knew who killed him. He knew who shot him from behind. He grabbed the guy's tie and pulls it off him. You can see pictures of him going through without his tie on. He sells the gun to a guy he works with. It was going to come up for investigation. And you know the California DA's name who blocked that case, Jason?
No.
Kamala Harris.
Well, I don't think that should shock anybody. I would say this, getting back to 9/11, after I did that Curt Weldon interview, I think a week or two later, I had Anthony Schaefer on. For those not familiar, Curt Weldon was the senator that brought forth Able Danger. Anthony Schaefer was the lieutenant colonel in charge of that. And Schaefer says he's talked to Trump directly. And I mean, again, you can go watch the interview. You take it for what he says, that Trump wants it out. He wants the 9/11 stuff. I don't know that that's going to happen. I mean, aside from the people on the inside that would be accountable at the highest levels. And when I say the highest levels, we're talking about the executive within the executive. We're talking about the continuity of government program. I've always said George W. Bush had no knowledge, and that H.W. Bush is probably somebody that you would have wanted to investigate. Of course, you can't do that anymore. A lot of people don't know this, but H.W. Bush actually spent the night in the White House on September 10th and was there on September 11th while his son was down in Florida with his brother with the book, and then gets fettered away on Air Force One and to several secure locations during the day. And Cheney, of course, is the vice president at the time. He's the one actually not only in the White House, but gets taken down into the operation of emergency management and essentially runs the operation from there on what to do and not to do after the 2 strikes on the World Trade Center and just before the strike on the Pentagon. I thought Schaefer, his interview, as bombshell as Curt Weldon was, and no one's talking about this, direct line of money from the CIA to at least 2 of these hijackers. The clip you played cut off a little bit of the beginning, but I mentioned that Walid al-Shehri, his neighbor, Deborah Albritton, called the CIA on him. Okay, like we need to get out of our minds that these people were not pinpointed by, large-scale law enforcement. They were time and time again. In that extended part of that interview, prior to me bringing up Deborah Albright, I bring up the fact that James Woods in August, just before the attacks, was on a plane. If you believe the transcripts from one of the trials that took place that came out in the Dark Overlord dumps, he believes it was actually Flight 11, one of the planes used on 9/11. He identified 4 individuals, 2 of which the FBI confirmed to him were, I believe it was Atta, and it may have actually been Khalid al-Mihdhar. It was either Nawaf al-Hamzi or Khalid al-Mihdhar, but they weren't supposed to even be in the same cell. Now, what's really interesting about that case is James Woods is on this plane. He thinks these guys are going to hijack the plane. He pulls a stewardess over. He talks to the stewardess about it. She agrees with him. Brings the pilot, talks to the pilot. The pilot says, you know what, we're going to lock the cockpit for the rest of the way. We're going to keep our eyes on these guys. And all 3 of them filed reports after that went to the highest levels. And actually, in the court hearing that was leaked by the Dark Overlord, James Woods that says that it was confirmed in by 2 separate individuals. He names the other FBI agent higher up than the people that he interviewed with. And then Seymour Hersh, his journalist friend, also confirmed that. I think 9/11 is going to be tough. I want to believe. Listen, man, I'm not on the hopium train, and that's the thing. You're not only talking about this government, you're talking about Israel, you're talking about Pakistan, you're talking about the funding from Saudi Arabia. And if you believe Curt Weldon's story, which is kind of like the meat of what he's going around talking about, other than the lies about 9/11 and hinting at the controlled demolition, is that bin Laden wasn't really hiding out in Pakistan where they eventually supposedly found him, right outside the military base. He says he's in Iran.
He had like 20 sources or something. Do you think that they were trying to plant false intelligence to that you think he was really in Iran, and that they later moved him out of Iran to Pakistan?
It is so hard for me to tell what the real story is there, because let's just go through what we do.
Was the best source, because he said he's a Falcon expert, and he saw Osama's Falcons in Iran. And that at that compound, and that's
and remember, he's also saying that it's Soleimani who facilitated this deal outside of the president of Iran at the time, Ahmadinejad, right? So, while they were demonizing that guy, apparently he wasn't even running what would be the military operations. Now, you also have to remember that you've got a triple cross guy in the mix. And what do I mean, triple cross? So when you have the Pakistani ISI through Mehmed Sheikh Ahmed, okay, he has 100,000 wired to Atta the week before the attack, but it's by a guy named Omar Saeed Sheikh. And why do I bring him up? Well, Omar Saeed Sheikh, he's the guy that they say beheads Daniel Pearl in that initial beheading. And Daniel Pearl is this Jewish journalist that goes overseas and is trying to find out where the funding and the operations are coming from in this whole thing. He gets captured. He gets beheaded by this guy that supposedly facilitated $100,000 to the hijackers. Now, what's really scary about this is that's been overturned. Okay. Now, Omar Saeed Sheikh was also accused of killing bin Laden before the infamous raid by Benazir Bhutto, whose father had been, I believe it was the president of India, and she was running for president. She eventually gets assassinated, by the way. One assassination attempt fails. You can actually watch her be killed. She's in a limousine where a man rolls up and shoots her while she's outside of the limousine. But what he didn't understand is he was not the lone assassin. They had somebody in a suicide vest or an explosive device right there. They blew everybody up and killed everybody. So right now, Omar Saeed Sheikh, despite all the connections I just told you about, is in a safe house in Britain. Okay. So this guy who is connected to the war of terror in ways that we just really can't imagine, and supposedly facilitated money and, again, maybe supposedly killed bin Laden, right? Because the other thing about bin Laden is you watch those bin Laden videos that were put out for propaganda purposes. And, you know, here's the thing. I'm not the big mask guy. You know how that was like the big conspiracy theory that kept going around like the last 3 to 5 years that everybody was in a mask, right? If you watch some of those videos, there's no doubt.
The video that they found at the house in Jalalabad, Afghanistan, that was supposedly had like a younger bin Laden, and it totally looked like early AI.
All I'm saying is I watched some of those videos. The facial movement is extremely stiff. It looks like prosthetics to me. He doesn't look the same. Like if you were just to type in bin Laden videos, I could.
Well, this is what's cited by
not even the confession video.
Story. They said, "Oh, bin Laden confessed."
That second one, the third one down, is one of the ones I'm talking about. Yes, right there.
Yeah.
So you watch this bin Laden tape, and you just look how stiff his face is, and to me, this could be an actual mask. Like we know that since actually HW, the CIA, had very, very realistic like masks. This is the fat bin Laden Abbottabad video. Again, looks totally different from that. Those are the early bin Laden videos that we've all seen. But again, you look at the bin Laden situation, and he's got U.S. intelligence written all over him prior. He's got Pakistani intelligence all the way up until the day before 9/11. A lot of people don't know this, but Dan Rather, in January of 2002, did a large-scale piece where they went down to a hospital in Pakistan where several members that work there, there's another one, there's the other video that I really think is suspect. But again, who knows? They basically treated bin Laden at the behest of the Pakistani military and protected him that night and then ushered him off that evening. So Pakistan had a much larger connection to bin Laden right out of the gates. Again, I asked Weldon about that, and he kind of turned it into Iran. He said he really didn't have that information on Pakistan. I don't know, man. I want to know if we're even going to get down to the truth of the 60s assassinations. And 9/11 is absolutely the crux. But there are literally dozens and dozens of other things that we need to come clean on, from Iran-Contra to, MK Ultra and Artichoke and Bluebird. And those are just the mind control programs that we know about. You know, as well as anybody, if not more than anybody, the amount of technology that has been hidden from the American and global public is astounding. Yeah. And
like with the D. Harold Bird at the depository building, there's a lot of connections to aerospace, and especially in, with what happened after, like just the defense industry and the military industrial complex in general. They needed these wars, and they talked about it. They wrote about it in the Project for the New American Century. But the fact that these guys were being funded, wasn't there another funding connection to like Bandar Bush in the
Bandar Bush is Bandar Bush was his last name wasn't really Bush, by the way. I forget what Bandar's, it was Prince Bandar. And yes. And he was so tight with the first Bush administration. That's where he got the moniker Bandar Bush. And obviously that bled into the second Bush administration. He's no longer alive. I don't know that there was any money directly connected to Bandar Bush, but Bandar Bush, I keep calling him Prince Bandar, is the one that essentially got the flights okayed and got the bin Laden family out of there. So like that is in Fabled Enemies. You can watch while everybody else was grounded. They were getting members of the bin Laden family out of the United States just like immediately. And what's really funny about that is they were doing that at the same time that many of the FBI agents that would have been working immediately on the case in New York were grounded for between 24 and 48 hours because they were all the way in California running exercises, anti-terror.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who is responsible for sending all the terrorism task force to California from the FBI?
It's one of those questions nobody asks and nobody seems to be aware of. And again, I put that in Fabled Enemies because I had one of those FBI agents talking about it and how they had been grounded and how they had to go across the country. And, this is one of those things that was brought up with Schaefer. I had met Anthony Schaefer at a speaking event back in 2010, in New York City at one of the churches. And we were in a private room together in the back green room. And I started talking to him about the war games and the red and blue teams that they talk about in Amalgam Virgo. So for those that don't know about Amalgam Virgo, this is a war game being run by the United States government in the summer before 9/11 that has bin Laden on the cover. And not only does it have bin Laden on the cover, but they have commercial airliners being hijacked, amongst many other scenarios, by the way. That's why there's a red and blue team, and there's different timelines on this. But the commercial airliner is flown into the Capitol building. So it's not flown into the White House, and it's not flown into the Pentagon, but it's another D.C. target. They show you the route out of Alaska, the whole nine. So this had red and blue teams on it. And I asked him, I said, is there a possibility that some of these hijackers, were actually U.S. government agents that thought they were running a war game, right? And at that point, 2010, he just couldn't wrap his head around that. He was just like, he still couldn't believe that the United States government could have anything to do with it. When I talked to him this time around and I talked about those drills, he goes, I remember that conversation. And he said basically that he couldn't wrap his head around that. And he goes, but if you look at everything that's going on 9/11 with all these drills, what a better way to run a terror attack when at the same time you're mirroring these scenarios everywhere. And what does that tell you? That there's pre-knowledge and there's people on the inside that either allowed this to happen or helped it along the way, right?
Well, this is a great point, Jason, and I'm glad you made it. And in fact, I invited along another expert on an element of this story to join us as the panel. I'd like to introduce Mr. George Webb. And George Webb has done some real deep dive investigation into a fascinating company that came on my radar in my 9/11 research, a company called P-Tech.
Well, it's great seeing Jason again. I did a show with you a while ago, Jason. It's been a while. But it's great to see you. And I'm no expert like Jason is on 9/11. He's been like the day after, I just do the communications piece of it. And I was covering aspiring in Congress using these encrypted BlackBerries. And I had a source. I was looking at people using this encrypted military grade encryption on Capitol Hill, 6 people from about 2004, maybe 2005. All the way until 2020. And this source called me and said, no, it goes back to P-Tech. It goes back to Jack Lew at the Secretary of Treasury, giving these, I'm getting a little bit of a feedback here. I'll turn my volume down. Giving these military grade encrypted devices for 9/11. Also for the people who wired the building, the art students, right? I can't remember their names. But if you look at this kind of operation where you pre-wire 3 buildings for demolition, it's a very large operation, and it has to be what they call a secure access program. an SAP. It has to be compartmentalized. So the guys pre-wiring Building 7 and WTC 1 and 2 don't know about the hijackers and where their whereabouts are, et cetera, et cetera. All the pieces have to then come back to a control point, and the codex, or the main nerve center of this, was PTEC. PTEC had all the Department of Defense clearances, right? Plus they had the FAA clearance. Like Jason was saying, these things normally start out as a live exercise, and then they kind of turn into the real thing. So all those things were in place with PTEC. This Indira Sang, or I can't remember her last name now, but she was the big whistleblower at the time. And so it's really from the encrypted communications point of view that you need something like that to pull something like this off.
Were you talking about Sibel Edmonds by chance with the whistleblower?
Well, I know Sibel, and I met Sibel. No, it was Indira. I'll get her name.
I think you might be right with Indira Singh, because I was going to say that Sibel Edmonds, her information kind of revolved around the Pakistani and the Israeli, funding and operations, and the inability, once she was a translator, to go into those realms and basically stomp out anything that showed it, because a lot of it had to do with nuclear secrets and trades and, the black ops spycraft that we often see in movies. But if we ever start talking about it in the real world, we're the crazy people. It doesn't matter that guys like Robert Maxwell actually exist and have, media empires while they're, backdoor selling Promise and Carnivore software to different intel agencies connected not only to Israel and the UK, but also Russia. He dies on a boat named after his daughter, who's involved in the largest child sex trafficking scandal that we publicly know about. I mean, just that paragraph alone sounds completely insane, but it's totally true. And, as far as the communications that went on that day, one of the fascinating things that kind of cross-references the drills is that we were able to get the NORAD tapes from, I think, in 2004 or 5, somewhere around there, 4 or 5 years after. Vanity Fair got them before we did. But then we got the direct link, and I even burned them for Webster Tarpley. The big takeaway for me is, like you said, if you start listening to them, and there were all these different channels, when the attack initially starts, the two people that are in command are like, wait a minute, is this real world or exercise? Did this start early? Because they had, I believe, a hijacking coming in. It was somewhere in the 9 a.m. range, so not quite 8:45, right? So it looked like it was like 20 minutes before. And then all of a sudden he's like, no, this is real world. A lot of the debunkers out there will say, well, immediately after the attacks, all these phantoms went away. Not real. Richard Myers, number one, testified, amongst others, that they fought, quote unquote, many phantoms that day. But those NORAD tapes clearly showed that the drills being run outside of Cheyenne Mountain, or inside of Cheyenne Mountain, I should say, had those phantoms and planes hijacked 20 minutes after United 93 and whatever happened there. And they stay on the line. They're like, we're staying on the line until you cut these exercises. And lo and behold, it's after all the exercises are cut off, and 93, which obviously didn't go as planned, folks. Like, clearly whatever happened there wasn't meant to happen, that everything stops. So the drills, to me, are the ultimate cover for this operation of confusion, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of them we had traced back to Rand Corporation, a guy named Bruce Hoffman. Bruce Hoffman wrote the scenario for WTC 93. He had also tried to talk about, we need a DHS, we need a big event, to get everybody serious about terror. Global terrorism, or the war on terror, took the place of the fall of the Soviet Union. We need a new bogeyman. So when Curt Weldon came out on Tucker, he acted like, he was the whistleblower, and Tucker sort of acted like he was whistleblower. No, Jason Bermas was the whistleblower, right? Right.
Listen, after. He was very gracious to me when he came on my program a couple months ago. And the way I found him, again, and obviously, I actually played the section of Able Danger where Curt Weldon is holding one of the Orion charts, and then some of the hearings from Able Danger. But, Weldon was on Jimmy Dore. And he was, if you haven't seen the Jimmy Dore interview, he's the Red Hulk. He is screaming the entire time, and he's beat red and upset. And I actually know Kurt Metzger, who's like the co-host. And, I immediately texted Kurt. I go, this is a banger. I'm so glad that Jimmy is having this on. But he didn't make the CIA revelation on there. So at the time, better times, if you will, when Patriot TV was doing better, and I had a producer, I said, you need to get me Curt Weldon and Anthony Schaefer. Because from that meeting with Schaefer in 2010, we'd been Facebook friends. After Jimmy Dore had that interview, Schaefer posted that not only was the interview, but more things about 9/11 were going to be coming out. And he had knowledge of that. And he talked to administration officials. So that's when I had Schaefer on. And like I said, he essentially said he talked to Trump himself, and Trump wants it out. I don't know what Trump knows. I don't know if Trump's seen a 5-minute video, if he's seen a documentary, if he's read a book, if he's talked to an insider. One of the other just astounding interviews I got through my producer this year was Rudy Giuliani in October. I never thought I was going to be interviewing Rudy Giuliani. First thing I bring up with him on 9/11 is the Pakistani funding and the fact that Joe Biden was one of the guys that met with General Mahmoud Ahmed in D.C. He actually went on TV and bragged about it, folks. Like, it's Brian Gumbel, I think. It's one of the funniest interviews you'll ever see, because he talks about how he's the most powerful person in Pakistan, or if not, the second most powerful. And he talks about how, he's got to get on board, who are our friends and enemies. And then later on, when Luke Rudkowski confronts him about it, he admits it again in the 2008 presidential campaign. Second time, he says it's classified, can't talk about it. So at that point, Giuliani literally says, we need to declassify everything about 9/11. Okay, all right, Rudy. I didn't think we were going to go there. At the end of the interview, I was like, listen, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring it up. I had tried to get an interview with his right-hand man, City Corporation Counsel Michael Hess. Why? Michael Hess is the other guy that got blown up in Building 7 with Barry Jennings, who we did get the interview with and is now deceased. So I brought that up with him. I said, hey, your City Corporation Counsel got blown up in Building 7. He got rescued there. What can you tell me about this? And so he kind of toes the line a little bit. He goes, well, they were lucky enough to rescue him. And he goes, but there was or little loss of life there. So he knows people died in Building 7, and he knows the excuse why they didn't talk about it. So he corrects himself at the end. Off the air, I wanted to be respectful. I turned it off, and I said, Rudy, I got to ask you. I go, you don't think that they demoed that building? 7, at least. And I'll say this, on air, and you can go check it out, he had actually brought up the fact that the CIA and the Secret Service were all in there, and it was a big spook office. And he'd also brought up the fact that they put snipers on the roof after the fact to clean up those documents. That's something I think we even included in Loose Change. So I asked him after the fact, I go, come on. And he goes, I don't think they blew it up because of all the documents in there. He goes, if the CIA wanted to destroy stuff and they were looking to get rid of a bunch of stuff, they could have absolutely done it. So I haven't had him back on yet, but I'm obviously going to pursue that angle again. And look, that's the thing. I think that a lot of these people that we think don't have blind spots do have blind spots, right? I mean, even Weldon now talking about the demolition and being in, the building after the 93 bombing in the basement where it was blown up. He never once alluded to any of that in any of the hearings, interviews, paperwork. I don't, and now when you talk to him about it, he says he immediately knew something was wrong when he was on the scene there. But
who did the 93 World Trade Center investigation and the report and that assessed the damages to the building and repaired them, they had to get access to the engineering blueprints for the building. Very interesting, because it was Tridata Corp, which is a division of SPC International, which is the comptroller of the Pentagon's company on 9/11.
Dov
Well,
Zakheim.
again, Dov Zakheim, and he's got, connections to remote controlled aircraft. That's a whole nother tunnel you can go down.
Right.
Weldon off the air, because we're bringing up 93. Okay. I brought up to him that Ahmed Salam, who was the person recruited by the FBI to infiltrate the Blind Sheik, was the guy that actually made the bomb. And he only did so with the help of the ATF and his FBI handlers, including John Antisev. And the only reason that we know that is because he started taping his conversations with Antisev when Antisev told him that they had to make the bomb. And so there's this famous recording, I put it in Visible Empire, where the guy who built the bomb is like, I feel terrible. People died in this thing. And he's like, oh yeah, no, it's really unfortunate. Some things happened that shouldn't have happened. And he's like, oh, what a wonderful case. You're an FBI informant, builds the bomb that blows up the World Trade Center. And nobody still knows that. Weldon knew that. He goes, I know, Jason. You know what he said after that? He goes, same thing in 95 with the Oklahoma City bombing. And I was like, all right, Curt, we're on the same page. So look, I want to believe that Curt Weldon is going to be able to help nudge this thing forward. I truly don't think that you can even get the semblance of a constitutional republic back unless you get into the truth about 9/11 and then criminal accountability. I don't even know what that means, right? Like, we just got more Crossfire hurricane documents. Not that we needed them. We already knew that, Trump wasn't getting pissed on by Russian hookers. Like, whatever fantasy land you want to be in, that's not real, okay? Is anyone going to go to jail for that? I don't think so. Like, I did the Reawaken America tour for the last, 2.5 years, talking about transhumanism and mostly a lot of anti-Musk stuff. I'm not going to mention the person's name, but you've seen him on every alternative media talk show out there. I've interviewed him several times. He's an ex-special forces guy and a lawyer. And this NPR woman, she'd been to a couple of these things, and, you could tell what her angle was. But he's sitting there talking about the enemies list and the people that are going to jail and the people that he's working with and all this other stuff. And she's really interested in this, because she wants to have a headline, all these other things. And all I'm doing to everybody that's listening to this in awe, like, oh, it's really, I'm like, none of this is real. No, not one person that he just mentioned is going to be serving any time in a federal penitentiary whatsoever, ever. And this guy, unfortunately, listen, I think he's a well-meaning guy. Total delusions of grandeur, total egomania. I'm sorry. You might think you're doing the right thing. I'm a little guy. I know where my reach lies. Okay. Even if I had all the law degrees in the world, what is the precedent of anybody in the executive office going to jail for any type of war crime at all? Where show it to me, because I missed it. Iran-Contra is the last time we had any kind of accountability. Most of that was I brought that up with Rudy because he was talking about Rudy's new book. The reason he came on the show was he had a book about the Biden crime family. And the first 5-10 minutes, he's talking about how they're going to jail. And I had to stop him. I go, Rudy, no one's going to jail. Like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, I'm like, let's stop. I go, we started talking about Bill Barr. And then he brings up that Bill Barr had the Hunter Biden laptop for 10 months before the media even was talking about it, right? And I go, yeah, you're proving my point. The guy who's the attorney general has the evidence before the media, and not only does no one go to jail, but they cover it up and have a bunch of other intel officers sign against it. I go, no one's going to jail, Rudy. Let's stop with the fantasy, because it is a fantasy. The Bidens ain't going to jail. Hillary Clinton ain't going to jail. I want the
convicted rapist President Donald Trump isn't going to jail.
Well, listen, as far as Trump goes, let me say this. The last person in the executive branch that went to prison for anything corrupt, and it wasn't a war crime, it was Scooter Libby, who took the fall for the Enron crimes, and Dick Cheney. Trump pardoned him. Now, did Scooter Libby get a raw deal compared to all the other criminals? You bet. Were his hands clean? Absolutely not. But, I mean, again, compare what he did with the massive amount of crimes that we know mainstay players that our household names have done. And they're like, I mentioned Scooter Libby. 1 out of 1,000 people knows who that is at this point. Maybe. Like if I went door knocking, you tell me who's Scooter Libby, nobody's going to know that. Had they put Dick Cheney in jail, everybody would know that name. There's the big difference. So look, I think that this administration is very different than others. I've met Kash Patel. Kash Patel walked off my show. There's another one. You know?
Patel was on your show. Hey, Jason, could you turn your mic down just a little tiny bit? Just
I can, sir. Yes, I had Kash Patel on. Obviously, before he was the FBI director. We're probably talking about a year and a half ago. And the other thing was Patel is actually on that tour I was talking about. So I'd see him on the peripheral. Physically, a very small, unintimidating man. I hope that his vigor and fervor goes well beyond that. Maybe it does. I brought up the signature reduction program with him, okay? Because he was basically on this train of talking about social media collusion with big government and how they're going to take it to him. And I go, yeah, that's all great. But the signature reduction program has been running since 2012, bare minimum. And for those not aware of the signature reduction program, maybe I'll bring it up right here and just read the first paragraph because it is so important. It is like the most important thing. So let me do that because it's right here. So everybody needs to read this. It's about a 40, 50-minute read. Exclusive. Inside the military's secret undercover army. Now, the first paragraph says the largest undercover force the world has ever known is the one created by the Pentagon over the past decade. Some 60,000 people now belong to this secret army, many working under masked identities and in low profile, all part of a broad program called signature reduction, which, by the way, is not the official name. It is literally an art form. Okay, that's what they refer to it as. The force, more than 10 times the size of the clandestine elements of the CIA, carries out domestic and foreign assignments, both in military uniform and under civilian cover, in real life and online. These are the Russian bots, everybody. Sometimes hiding in private businesses and consultancies, some of them household name companies, aka the Googles of the world, the Twitters of the world, anything that's significant, all the military industrial complex. Now, they actually follow around one of these guys, and I want to show everybody this because it's important. So we were talking about masks earlier. This is a DARPA manufactured silicone hand sleeve that goes over your hand, that creates fake identities and not only has anybody's biometrics on it that you want, but it also emits human oils. And if you want the full garb, I mean, they've got that too. You know, they can make you look like a monster. So when I brought up that program to him, and I essentially said, well, we have this program that's never been audited, where they literally have access to every type of Social Security, driving record you can imagine, so they can alter it or create it on the fly. Like the guy that he's following around is in a car with a fake license plate where the guy has a fake identity and it's all legit stuff. It's just none of it's real. And they're carrying out, again, domestic operations. I brought that up. He waited till the commercial break. He jumped ship. The producer said that I was getting too QAnon, because we all know how QAnon I've been. And I'm like, the program's right here. I want this thing audited. Like, are you kidding me? We're talking about the CIA or the NSA spying on people. These people are openly running operations where they have access to not only all of your records, but all records to manipulate situations where they can not only take your identity, but frame you. Like the silicone hand sleeve was a lot for me. And think about how old that technology is.
That's really good.
Framing too, because DNA evidence goes a long way in court. So if they just have a toenail clipping or a piece of your hair and they plant it at the crime scene, most people in a jury are going to be like, well, his DNA, what's his DNA doing there? And you're done.
Long Island serial killer right now, five hairs, rootless hairs. That's what they're using to convict the guy in New York right now for the Long Island serial killer.
Oh, really? See, well, I mean, that's pretty wild too, because you could just go to a jail or go to court and find just hairs and leave them at crime scenes. So it just gives them a false trail to find, and they're just gonna yeah, it's pretty wild what they can do these days. But let's talk about back to 9/11, the framing of these hijackers. There was a 20th hijacker named Zacharias Moussaoui. And there was a number of other people that were deemed unfit to stand trial after decades of torture. They didn't give these guys a trial. They held them and tortured them mercilessly. And I always like to point out and tell people about the whole UFO connection to this, because one of the guys who took place in that torture stuff was a guy named Luis Elizondo. And Luis Elizondo then went and joined up with this guy Tom DeLonge, the Blink-182 rock star, and they formed this group called TTSA with a whole bunch of other CIA people, and basically created a limited hangout operation in a counterintelligence operation. He's a counterintelligence expert, and that's what he did with the whole 9/11 bullshit. But they moved him from 9/11 bullshit to UFO bullshit, and he's now like just doing the UFO circuit, pretending like he's some kind of expert and professional on all this. Like, really, just it's crazy.
Just because you brought up the 20th hijacker and Moussaoui, I've got to reiterate, during his quote unquote trial, they had him in a physical stun belt. So if he dared to speak out of turn, they would shock him. That was in a U.S. court. That was not in a military tribunal. Just type it in. Moussaoui stun belt. Now, the other big news story, you're just alluding to Guantanamo Bay. Again, one of those things that I talk about constantly, being in this game for so long, is in 2008, when you had, the Democratic players running for the president. It was actually the very first YouTube debate. Everybody can go check it out. Anderson Cooper moderated it. They had people present questions via YouTube and do it. Every single establishment politician up there, every one of them said they were going to close down Guantanamo Bay. Now, there were two genuine voices up there, Dennis Kucinich and Michael Gravel. Let me tell you the all-stars that also pledged that they were going to close Guantanamo Bay that absolutely didn't and had the opportunity. Barack Starr, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, all three of them, that would be part of that next administration, pledged that they were going to shut down Guantanamo Bay, along with other losers like John Edwards. I'm pretty sure, what's his name? Richardson was up there, the Ben Richardson, who was connected to Epstein at New Mexico, the governor, and the Clintons big time. They all said they were going to close Gitmo. Now they're going to expand Gitmo to put illegals in it. Meanwhile, they're still torturing two of the 9/11 suspects. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is obviously the bigger name of the two, but I saw people were like outraged that they were going to cut some kind of deal with them. Guys, they've been in a torture facility for 20 plus years with no due process whatsoever, and the most minuscule insight you could ever get into their military tribunal trials. Does that sound like some individuals you could actually convict of a crime that's going to take 20 plus years? As soon as they were there for a couple of years and the levers weren't turning, people should have been outraged. The fact that they're outraged that they're not going to kill these people outright when you didn't even see a trial. And obviously they had nothing to do with the demolitions of 1, 2, and 7. And I would say there's probably some other explosive activity at 6 as well. That rooftop is blown up, it doesn't look like it's caved in. And by the way, when you actually watch one of the towers go down, there seems to be a separate explosion just where 6 is that has its own individual plume. There's a lot going on 9/11. There's also what appears to be, and I know this sounds totally nuts, but a surface-to-air missile being fired. I think it's from the Sears Tower in New York City. There's a video where it's right on top, and all of a sudden you just see this thing flare out and go through, and I'm like, what is going on there? You couple that with not one, but 2 vans with these Israeli operatives. It wasn't one. George Washington Bridge had another incident on it. One of those vans exploded on King Street. That's another thing no one even talks about. Literally, we have the audio of the police. It's in Fabled Enemies. People go check it out, where they pull these guys over. They said they get them out of the van, and the van exploded. Now, if you read the paperwork after that, they beat the shit out of those guys after that. They beat them very badly. They were on, I mean, they'd already been subdued, and then the van exploded, and they got emotional, and they beat them up. Now, that's not on audio tape. Shocking. But it is in the report that let's just say they were in the best shape when they brought them in. Why doesn't anyone talk about that? It's maddening to me on so many levels. Another big thing, another 9/11 mystery no one wants to talk about. Sander Hicks did a book called The Big Wedding. All right. And I encourage everybody to read it. Very much goes down the history trail of U.S. intelligence, 70s, 80s, Mujahideen, bin Laden connections, that type of thing. But a lot of it is told in the modern day through this Canadian intelligence operative that may or may not be full of total shit, right? He can't get a beat on him. He's got a very weird relationship with this teenage boy that's not his kid. He ends up in jail. But he has this list of targets while he's in jail that he gives to the police officers there. And he said, these are going to get hit on September 11th. Okay. Not only is everything on that list that does get hit, but the same list ends up in the hands of the governor of Maryland on the morning of 9/11 before the attacks happened. So he goes on the air. I know that another little spot, a lot of people don't know this one, again, in Fabled Enemies, Paris Glendening, the governor of Maryland, goes on the air and he's getting interviewed. And he's like, I got a list this morning and a call from the police department where all these targets were there. I think he says the Sears Tower was on there and there were some other ones. But the same list that this Canadian operative had, Paris Glendening gets on the morning of 9/11. All of these things are things that have not only not been mentioned in the mainstream, but the alternative doesn't seem to know about. So, look, I want to see a new investigation just like Curt Weldon. I don't know who you put in charge of it, right? There are so many players that are at jeopardy. I mean, look at Israel right now. Like that is the biggest danger to global stability outside of Ukraine, Russia, and NATO. And quite frankly, it all intermingles. You got the same guy in power, Netanyahu, that said, I think it was in 2008 or 9, it might have been a little bit before that, maybe 7, that we are benefiting from one thing right now, and it's the attacks of September 11th. Like openly, like you go check that quote out. Like it's an insane quote. And although I don't necessarily think that Israel carried everything out, they obviously had surveillance on the ground. They had teams all over the hijackers. That network wasn't just in New York and DC. In fact, in Fabled Enemies, we have that spot, but go rewatch that Fox series. They had picked over 100 of these guys up prior to 9/11. And it went all the way across the country. They were in California. Everybody talks about the art students, right? One of the other things that they were doing is they had kiosks in malls. So you remember, back before we had the little mini drones, you had those little like Velcro helicopters where you'd zip tie the thing and it'd go flying up. They were running kiosks there. And then they were intermingling with army and military personnel so that they could figure out where they worked at secret locations. And they were able to find a ton of different secret locations. I mean, again, and that's in there that they had infiltrated all these things. So that's one aspect. I think with the Pakistani military, again, that's kind of a proxy organization for the United States. What are they doing without the U.S. or British intelligence? I don't necessarily know. Again, that Omar Saeed Sheikh story is insane. And then you have to get into the players in the United States because there has to be some. And the continuity of government program and the E4Bs is another one of those aspects that just does not get brought up enough. And again, shows that there is some kind of pre-intelligence, or you wouldn't have seen these doomsday planes on the scene of the World Trade Center before the second plane strike. You can clearly see one of the E4Bs is there. And then in DC, less than a minute after whatever happens at the Pentagon, you see another E4B there. Well, we know there was at least 4 of those over the country that day, and 2 of them happened to be at the scenes of the attacks. I think that's a big question worth asking.
Well, Enron, the Enron investigation was going on, at the Securities Exchange Commissions in Building 7. I think that's another one of those that because I worked in the Woolworth building when they moved out of 7 and into the Woolworth building because they didn't have a building anymore. So there was definitely a big cover up there, and they were doing oil deals. General Shelton was doing oil deals, and Curt Weldon was very connected into this group. He's very connected into Rumsfeld. He was very connected into Cheney and Bush. He in the interview, he talks about them being like personal references, and those are not the first three guys that would come to mind. So
no, it's interesting you mentioned that because in Building 7, most of the floors were actually leased by a company called Solomon Smith Barney, and Solomon Smith Barney had both Rumsfeld and Cheney on their foreign policy advisory board, and they both quit to join the Bush administration. So that's another huge connection that people miss to Building 7.
Well, Weldon also talks about how he was set to, head up the Armed Services Committee. He talks about his relationship with James Woolsey, former head of the CIA, and
Genie Energy.
Yes, and not a person that I trust, by the way, Woolsey. So again, you get into these scenarios, and it's been very weird for me because, again, now that I'm actually talking to some of these people and meeting them in person, like spending time with General Flynn, I never thought I would be doing that either. I mean, obviously.
Yeah, that's wild because you interviewed Rudy, and Rudy was somebody that many others figured as a suspect early on, and
again, I don't necessarily know that he's not a suspect on smaller parts of the cover-up after the fact, whether he knows it or not, right? Because everybody's covering up something for someone. But, I don't know.
Plausible deniability in every step as an operative.
It's just always there. But if you just look at the hard science, like Giuliani is in hearings talking about the 2,000+ degree temperatures at the World Trade Center. Pataki is on the record saying the same exact thing, who was the governor at the time. And no matter what you want to say about eyewitnesses and all these other things, you can't fake the NASA thermal imagery that shows those temperatures. In fact, James Bukarski, who was the head of FEMA, I often cite this because the debunkers, they love to say, jet fuel only burns at 1,500 degrees. It only had to be that hot. And then you have this not melting of the steel, but the instability. And then basically you have this point of collapse, and then everything else collapses.
Yeah, there's that metallurgy video from that metal. It's called Purgatory Metalworks down in Georgia. And that guy made the video, and it has like 14 million views. And yet, like, the AE 9/11 truth stuff gets super suppressed, which counters all of that with real science. If you really dig into the science of it.
Again, Baker Sky I think it's on September 13th or September 14th, 3 or 4 days after, 2,700 degree temperatures, and he's talking about people just like Curt Weldon is.
It was melted.
Vaporized.
Leslie Robertson even says it. Did you hear that clip? Have you heard that?
Robertson?
Leslie Robertson, the architect for the who designed the World Trade Center. He was there at the site. He says he saw a river of steel. That's what he says.
Well, one of the reasons I bring up Building 6 is Ken Holden of FEMA at one of the hearings talks about molten metal dripping in the basements of Building 6. So it's not just secluded to 1, 2, and 7. This molten material that should not exist, that obviously we have a multitude of firefighters talking about on video. Again, in government hearings, if you go to cspan.com right now, I'll tell you right now, Ken Holden hasn't been in many of these big public hearings. Just type Ken Holden in. You can watch him talk about it right there. Just type in what I said about Building 6. I mean, you don't have to. You can go watch it on, it's in Fabled Enemies, but just the fact that this is in the public record by public officials, and yet we can't wrap ourselves around what it really means, it's just in passing, is incredible to me. I still, guys, just so you know, get picked on when I go back to New York for like alumni weekends by the older crowd. Like, they all think I'm crazy. I mean, these are the people that are like quadruple jabbed, maybe more. Like they have severe TDS, but there are a lot of those people still left on this planet that think that the government just tells them the truth. The media tells them the truth. And people, I'm dangerous, bro. I'm dangerous.
Right.
Well, Weldon didn't impress me with transparency in the interview, to be honest with you, because he didn't. I mean, he made it sound like they raided his daughter for no reason. He was involved in that ITERA deal, and that ITERA was that Russian company doing pipelines in Iran. There was an Iran to India pipeline through Pakistan. There was another one called TAPI that was running from Turkestan down to India. They were involved in a lot of, you remember Unocal and Enron with all the natural gas pipelines. There was a lot going on.
And for those who know about Unocal, as soon as we took over Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, who was the guy that we installed, was a Unocal executive and basically helped broker those initial deals that you're talking about of these pipelines. On top of that, his brother, Walid Karzai, ends up becoming the number one warlord in the region, an opium dealer, okay? And he ends up getting taken out by one of his guys, probably CIA run folks, because that guy didn't make it out of the room. So, that's how these things work. You get certain levels of power. There's nepotism everywhere. You kind of just alluded to it with Weldon and his daughter, and now you could look at Karzai and his brother. But you burn these people, and you're expendable. That's it. You know what I mean? And that's another thing I don't think people get is the amount of pressure. I mean, we've seen careers ruined. We really don't know who bit the bullet by saying something and that maybe didn't get out. I'm sure there are those people too. In fact, just
John
another
O'Neill.
side stories.
I think John O'Neill was set up.
John O'Neill's a great question, but there's a different, I think his name is John. Firefighter that we interviewed. His interview is in Loose Change Final Cut. You can get his full interview elsewhere. But, he had talked about explosion in the building. They found a dead body stuffed in a closet while they were clearing rooms. Like he goes, what is this? Like they went to go clear a room and there's a dead guy just stuck in a closet in the middle of this whole thing. So they were tying up some loose ends. And I would say this, you want to know more about John O'Neill and that whole situation with security at the World Trade Center and those companies, the Dark Overlord documents really take you through it because O'Neill, I mean, they make it sound like his first day was like right around September 11th. He had been scouting that place for months in anticipation for that job and complaining about some of the security and all these different whereabouts that had vulnerabilities. I always, and I wonder if we'll ever see it, I always wonder what happened to those other two Dark Overlord dumps. But I will say this, they did arrest a bunch of those people from the Dark Overlord. There was like a very small news story, probably about 2 months after the 3 dumps came out. They found a couple of them in Europe and you've just never heard from them since.
Well, I would like to see them just dump the documents for everything, and don't go through any congressmen or congresswomen. They did that with the JFK Angleton document with the 197 page report. Remember how the congressman who bikini poser, she did it with Oliver Stone. Just put all the documents out. Let Jason Bermas have a crack at it. Let Jeremy have a crack. Let me have a crack at it.
And let me say this about Anna Polina that you're alluding to, right? The bikini babe. She's probably the last person, no offense, everybody, that I would want in charge of it.
Is her new nickname.
Don't know how she got into politics. I mean, it wasn't just a social media influencer, guys. She's an ex-stripper from Florida. And look, again, you do your own thing. I'm not here to judge. I've dated strippers. Okay. I'm not Johnny Churchgoer. I'm just telling you that is an extremely transactional and manipulative business. And all I'm saying is that kind of thing. I mean, I guess it intertwines great with politics, but maybe not with transparency and truth. I'm just throwing it out there.
Luna Chick is her name.
Luna. Yeah. Just they give, like you said, it was only 14 PDFs, but one of them was Angleton looked at the, Oswald file on the 13th of November and the 14th of November, 200 pages. It kind of shows some, shepherding. It kind of shows some handling, right? and she's the one who's going to, release it. And now we're down to the last 3,000 documents. I don't want to see this for every 14 documents we have to go through this.
Well, the one I'm really looking forward to, if we ever get to see it, and I don't know, is that Warren C. DeBrew, who was essentially Oswald's FBI handler. This was an individual that had been outed by Arresta Pena out in New Orleans, and Pena had worked for him, okay? And he was like the head of the division there. He owned a bar. So he was basically, running intel for the FBI. They would meet their assets at this bar. So Pena had seen Oswald with Warren C. DeBrew many times. Now, in 1974, CBS does a 2-part documentary series where they interview DeBrew, they interview Pena, and they also interview an individual that clearly says that he saw documentation that Oswald was CIA. Okay? They interview all these people. Later on, DeBrew, he basically, before he dies, he's part of this FBI book. It's kind of like one of those internal annal books, like almost a yearbook, but not quite. And in it, it's got just this short little description of him. And I'm interested because there's this document that is contended on whether it's real or not that I've reported on for many years between John McCone, the head of the CIA, and the head of the Secret Service. And it essentially says that Oswald was CIA and he was trained by the Office of Naval Intelligence, okay? And in there, they also say maybe in his time in Russia, they actually talk about the possibility in this document of him having a brain chip, basically, like a mind control apparatus. It's a very interesting document. So when I find out that DeBrew is a real person, and then I find this, I'm like, huh. And then, and these are the documents that I'm waiting for, I find out that DeBrew did the initial overnight investigation of the assassination itself. And he did it from Dallas because he followed Oswald from Dallas in the weeks before the assassination to be there. And then they put him in charge of the initial 800-page investigation. Now, whether or not that's a whitewash, I don't know because we don't have it. That's not part of the documents. But the only reason that I know that he followed him to Texas, aside from that little blurb that said that he did the initial 800-page, is when Trump did that initial document dump in 2017 and 18, those 2 file dumps, the first one had the documents where DeBrew got reassigned from New Orleans to Texas to follow Oswald. So I had 4 or 5 documents of that actually happening. I have yet to be able to find the documents of this, again, this 800-page investigation. Who knows? It might be genuine, right? I think the jury's out on how much Oswald knew about the operation and how involved he was. He was obviously doing black ops, right? He's not a dumb guy. He knows all these languages. He speaks rather well. He's got 2 wives and a girlfriend at this point. If that doesn't speak spook central to you, I don't know what. You obviously haven't studied the craft, right? So
he was stationed at Atsugi Air Force in Japan, which is where they ran the U-2 spy plane out of. Was the CIA's most top secret operation during that time period. And also he had a medical he got gonorrhea, and normally you'd get a dishonorable some, but he had a excused and for the line. It said in the medical report that he incurred the gonorrhea in the line of duty. So what was he doing, courting with strippers or something in the line of duty?
Or there's a lot of talk now, and a lot of the Israel stuff has come out in the last several years. I've got a great book here. I think it's by Ken McCarthy on RFK and JFK and their battle against Zionism. I remember many, many years ago, Michael Collins Piper talking about the Israeli connection to the JFK assassination. I think that is something I want to keep pretty secret because it looks like there is some operational value. And then the other big thing that I'd only heard of in the last several years is the biolabs and the fact that David Ferry was into cancer research and had all these mice. And the girlfriend of Oswald, who's still alive to this day, said that he was involved. He
Judith
may have
Mary
been.
Baker. I've been trying to get her on.
Yeah, I mean, he might have just been sleeping around with, personnel in scientific or medical facilities for whatever reasons, to be part of those programs and see what they were up to. It might have been infiltrating similar things overseas. Like when you're in the CIA, that's what you are a people person, right? Even when I had Schaefer on, like the last thing he says, he's like, I know what I'm going to say is going to sound totally wild and just like totally inverted. He goes, I've dedicated my life to spycraft. And he's like, in order to do that, you've got to lie, you've got to cheat, you got to steal, you got to manipulate. But you've got to do it in an ethical manner. So you got to understand, man, these people that get into this, I mean, they kind of draw their own lines, but where those lines are extremely blurred. Anytime I'm around somebody that might rub me the way of that, and look, the really good ones, I guess they wouldn't rub me that way. Or, Patrick Byrne is a really good example of that. Like, I was around Patrick Byrne quite a bit the last 2.5 years. I kept my distance. And that was long before this story of him working with the CIA and the FBI and, the Democrats and all that other stuff. There's always something about those people that are just and again, Patrick Byrne's a billionaire, right? And I mean, maybe not now, but at the time of recruitment, very much in that circle or close to that circle. So that also tells you that it's not just like the low rank guys like Oswald. It's the bigger level guys they'll recruit or compromise and make them work for you. We talked about Robert Maxwell before. I mean, you look at a guy like Byrne, and he's in tech, he's in political circles. I'm not saying he's a bad guy. I'm just saying, like, I'm not saying Schaefer's a bad guy. Well, all I know is lies don't make friends, and I'm probably not cut out for the spy arena.
It's about 15 of those 19 hijackers on 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia. And I believe like 13 of those 15 got their visas through one Saudi embassy in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. And there's a whistleblower named Michael J. Springman, or J. Michael Springman. If people want to look that up, they can find it in his testimony. He's still around, and all these people are, like Curt said, all these people are ready to go. They're ready to testify. They have the victims' families. They got the Jersey girls. They got all these firefighters. They got everybody ready to go on this. All it takes is Trump's got to get enough. We got to show enough momentum in this country to get Trump behind the whole project. And I remember back in like 2006, 2007. How big the 9/11 truth movement was. I mean, there was banners on highways across the country, like everywhere and stuff. We just there was no one in power in this country to do anything about it. Imagine if we could reignite that like fever and bring that back.
Going to be tough against the algorithm, bro. And you, just because you mentioned J. Michael Springman, and I think it's really important that people understand this. Springman left that embassy that you're talking about, where yes, 13 of the 15 hijackers came through, because
that was the embassy where George Tenet worked before he became CIA director, and that was also the embassy that John Brennan worked at before he became CIA director. And actually, John Brennan was the guy that Springman says issued the visas. So for those that don't know, again, Springman had these individuals that had no business getting U.S. visas. He would deny them, and then his superiors would come to him and say, you're going to give these guys visas. And he gets tired of this song and dance, so he leaves. He then, before 9/11, starts asking around, like, what the hell was actually going on there? And people within the embassy tell him that they are running assets for their asset, Osama bin Laden. So he's saying they're working with bin Laden right there. And then it's years later that, again, this happens, and these hijackers come out of that facility. So to me, you wonder where the connections are and what those people that came over with those visas were actually doing. You look at someone like Atta,
And Otta's military trained. He's down in Florida. He's got connections to the flight school. He's dating a stripper. It looks like they're dealing cocaine. Like,
and that
he looks like
Huffman Aviation, right?
Yeah, and that guy, Rudy Deckers, is no longer around. Rudy passed a couple years ago, but he was another pretty interesting individual that probably knew more than he said. People have even alluded to Otta's connection to Casino Jack and those offshore gambling and drug rings that they were doing. Kevin Spacey played him. Jack, Abramoff, who went to jail, who was infamous. Very much a possibility. Bottom line is, when you look at these guys, a bunch of them trained at U.S. bases across the country. You had Maxwell Air Force Base with Muhammad Atta. You had some of them literally listing their home addresses as Florida military institutions.
Sarasota Air Naval Station.
And then you also had the Defense Language School out in California, where the vice chancellor came forward and said several of his students had been involved, and that he said the Bush administration had allowed the attacks to happen because they needed them. He was quickly reprimanded and never spoke of it again.
Now, who's the guy that said that right after 9/11, a plane landed at the Huffman Aviation at the airport there in Venice, Florida, and like Jeb Bush loaded all the records from Huffman Aviation onto it?
Dan Hopsiker. That was Dan Hopsiker. I did a lot with Dan down there on the tarmac at Venice Airport.
Venice is like the CIA's training ground for agents that get sent there for training. Apparently, it's
all the way back to the China hands, when the China hands were flying the drugs over the hump, for Donovan after World War II. Even before that, it was training. But there's a couple of Iranians here that Curt Weldon mentions in his book. He wrote the book, Countdown to Terror, and he mentions Ali. I think Ali Al-Attar, the whole book's based on Ali Al-Attar. And I think the real reason they hammered him in 2006 was that book outed Ali Al-Attar in 2005. Ali Al-Attar was handpicked to go into the Iraqi government and run the health ministry. Chalabi, if you remember, Chalabi was a Rand Corporation guy. Woolstetter kind of said, let's put Chalabi in there as the oil minister, right? These guys were all kind of handpicked. And they were well known by Weldon, right? And Weldon, is meeting in Paris and finding out where Osama bin Laden is in Iran through Al-Attar. Al-Attar also was in my little spy ring. He was the key Hezbollah contact for the Pakistani ISI group on Capitol Hill. So what my point is that when I grew up, there was the Watergate hearings, and it was like I used to go home every day. You guys are too young; it was before you're born. But this may be why Brennan left the country. If Tulsi ever decides, I'm getting feedback, decides to do, Watergate style hearings for 9/11, which is what we need. First guy I call is, like you said, John Brennan. What were you doing approving these guys' visas? And then you just go down the list of all the government agents and release all the documents.
Right down the line. Start with him.
Just because you mentioned Brennan, and here's another reason I don't know that we're going to get any of this stuff. I mentioned the Crossfire hurricane stuff. If you listen to those Seymour Hersh calls with Ed Butowski, and Ed Butowski, another guy that didn't end up on my Making Sense of the Madness show. I had a TNT show. Like, I remember them telling me they were booking 4 guests like every show, and I saw Ed Butowski on there, and I'm like, you know who Ed Butowski is, right? And she's like, he's a finance guy. I'm like, he's the Seth Rich guy. Like, what are you talking about? So Butowski, gets Hersh on the phone, and Butowski, for those that don't know, is the initial guy that hires a private investigator to investigate into Seth Rich, and then that guy goes on television and says there's foul play, and it explodes on Fox News, and then the parents and the brother come out and say, no, shut up, and it all goes away. Hersh says that that's a Brennan operation. Okay, in those phone calls, not only does he say it's a Brennan operation, he says that one of his guys in the FBI goes in and gets him the documentation that, number one, Seth Rich, when they went to go into his computer, the DCPD could not get into it. Okay. So that's when they had to get into the FBI. The FBI does get into it. And then you basically find these interactions between WikiLeaks and payments through eBay transactions. So they're making these big payments through fake eBay transactions, and that's how he gets these things out there. When they go to court, and again, no one reported on this in the mainstream, let alone the alternative. You know who that FBI agent supposedly went in and read those documents and told Hirsch that is? It's McCabe, the deputy director of the FBI, who's got his hands completely dirty. Now, the reason I bring that up is Seth Rich was supposed to have files come out at the end of March. They were supposed to actually let out a pretty good trove. And remember, they told us that they didn't have any FBI files on Seth Rich. Then we had the Mueller report where they, in excerpts, very small excerpts, had to admit that they had done an FBI investigation. And who was part of that? Peter Strzok. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So we don't get those documents in March. Instead, we get a list of documents that are supposedly there. But again, they've lied to us already of what's supposedly there, so who knows? Those Crossfire Hurricane documents came out. Why not just release everything Seth Rich? If you really want to show that these, there was no Russia, which there wasn't, it's pretty easy to do. I mean, everybody here knows that Bill Binney, and I mean, I talked about this with Anthony Schaefer, amongst others, just shows the data rate, and look, I'm a college dropout pizza guy. I know the difference between a data rate on a USB stick or a hard drive connected to a computer and something that's hooked up to a Wi-Fi line, and a Wi-Fi line that's like 100 KB max, kilobytes a second. I mean, we're talking about a time period in 2016. It's not like everybody had fiber. I have a gig up and a gig down now. They didn't. So you just look at the data rate transfer, and you can see the data rate transfer is not over the internet, period, full stop. Okay. So now you know it's a physical thing. I mean, maybe, like that's one of the reasons Brennan's leaving. It's not necessarily 9/11. Maybe it's the Seth Rich Russia stuff. These people are so dirty, it's hard to figure out, right? Because now
multiple crimes. You got to imagine like a serial killer that hasn't been caught will continue to kill.
But again, let's look at the Epstein documents for a minute. Now, there's another one that I've been doing since 2008? In large part, there have been really no new Epstein documents since 2017. All those other releases from 2017 on, most of them, if there was anything, they were the same documents, slightly less redacted. Like, for instance, Ehud Barak came out after that. But again, if you read the documents where it was blacked out and then you read the news stories associated with them, we all knew it was Ehud Barak, right? So there wasn't anything really new there. If they are actually, this time around, going through the real Epstein documents, in other words, the binders full of photographs and burned CDs, the hard drives, you're going to have to indict and criminally charge people. Now, I don't know that that's happening, but you can't release the actual documents of child rapists raping kids and have them be the heads of business or a face on television, and people are like, oh, we have the documents now and nothing's happened. No, you need to actually charge them with the crime first, present that in court, go through that judicial process, and then after the fact, you can release those documents. One of the things that really bothered me about that initial binder is, again, I've been following this for a very long time. People forget, before Epstein got arrested and taken to jail, he had this large civil case going on with Virginia Giuffre Roberts and all these other women. There were several others that were represented by Bradley Edwards. He towed that line right up until they had selected a jury and they were ready to go to trial. As soon as the jury was selected, NDAs everywhere, and he gave them all this money, okay? What did Bradley Edwards and the other lawyer do? They held a press conference immediately after with stacks and piles of documents behind them, that at least a truck full. I mean, you could type it in right now. Just type in Brad Edwards Epstein press conference. They're outside. There are so many file cabinets they brought outside, stacked. That was the civil case, like with, I think it was it was either like 12 or 13 victims. In the Florida case alone, you have several hundred known victims. That ain't New Mexico. That ain't overseas, where clear. And the other thing is with Epstein, I mean, they may go, I think it's kind of hopium. They may go with some like small level, oh, you're a pedophile. They're never going to talk about the fact he was an arms dealer. He was an arms dealer, everybody. That's the big secret, is that, look, kids are worth a lot of money, blackmail's worth a lot of money, and ICBM, that's not chump change. And neither are a bunch of them. We're talking in the 80s, billions of dollars of transactions. And the other thing is, not only is he connected to Adnan Khashoggi was another pimp. Okay. And Adnan Khashoggi was an overseas pimp. You don't think Adnan Khashoggi had teenage girls? Come on, man. Like and Khashoggi's also Trump's friend. In fact, Trump bought the Khashoggi boat. I think that was one of the really weird connections. But that got a whisper in the mainstream media from Vicky Ward, and then she shut her mouth too, right? George, you might get a kick out of this one because I bet you didn't see this. But last year, when there was supposed to be, like, again, that big document dump of Epstein and everyone was talking about it, comedian Louis Black went on the They Might Be Drunk podcast, okay? And he talked about his one time meeting Jeffrey Epstein at the New York mansion. Now, he's being brought there by his manager, and he's being told that they're going to have great wine, and it's going to be a big party, it's going to be a fun time. So he gets there, and David Blaine shows up, by the way. David Blaine, big friend of Epstein. Also a big friend of Bryan Singer, who's also a totally known pedophile. Throwing that out. I met David Blaine also. I throw that out. So anyway, he's sitting there, and Epstein pulls him into the other room, and he points at a whiteboard, and he goes, "You know what that is?" Louis Black goes, "No." He goes, "I had the Israeli defense minister over last night, and we were discussing weapon systems." So he's got a chart of weapon systems on a whiteboard that he's discussing with the Israeli defense minister. Do you know what Prince Andrew's main gig in the UK was? He was their arms dealer, dummies. That's why they were getting him all these women. That's the other thing. People think that people were paying to go have sex with kids on the island. Listen, there were the close cohorts of him that they were kind of interdealing. Who's Jean-Luc Brunel is probably the best example that we have evidence of that from the white papers. Brunel dead, by the way. He ended up dead in a foreign prison, just so everybody understands. Hung himself. And Brunel wearing IDF hats on planes with Epstein, like literally in the Israeli Defense Forces gear. Most of these people would go to these parties or go to this island, and they'd have these beautiful women around. Some of them were young and underage. Maybe they knew, maybe they didn't. But then they'd be compromised after the fact. So if you were going along to get along, great, there's no problem. As soon as you would push back on a deal or an interest, that's when the blackmail comes out. Nick Bryant has done the key work on this and kind of coordinated with what was happening at the Franklin scandal. And he's like, look, during that time period, it was Republicans and young boys, and it was Democrats and young girls. And every once in a while it would intermingle, but that was the main thing. And you look at the evidence, I mean, look even now, modern day Abercrombie and Fitch guy. Like it's the young boys, right? And you look in the 80s, Claude Hadid is another one that, it was very easy to run this model operation because you'd get him like at 14 to 16 years old. You'd take him overseas, where in some countries that's legal age, right? There's no cell phones. You maybe get one call a day. It's going through letters. You're competing with the other 6 girls in your apartment like it's a dorm. And then you get brought to dinners. And if you want a job, there's a 55-year-old man right there waiting for you to take you to dinner and have a great night with you, and you'll get a gig tomorrow. I mean, that's how it worked, folks. Like, and I know that sounds disturbing, but we haven't reined that in either. And in order to rein that in, and I know I've ranted for a long time, we need to start getting some criminal accountability on some levels. And
yeah, we need perp walks. We need arrests. That's bottom line.
And the documents too. I think getting the documents to every person and then you can't walk it back. Then like Jason said, if these are out there, then people demand it, right? And then you'll have the fire starter. That'll be a fire starter. I didn't want to talk too much about Weldon, but I just wanted to say that I do think Osama bin Laden did spend some time in a military base, but it was Isfahan, and that's the Bell helicopter training base that Peter Strzok's dad ran in Iran, and they trained the ICRG military on helicopter flying. It's still there. There's still Americans teaching, and that's the connection to Soleimani, and that's the connection to Al-Attar. And so I think Weldon would be a great witness. And I just think this Weldon thing put John Brennan over the edge. It was like, oh, wait a minute. This is way too close to the shit I did at 9/11.
What do you think about the bin Laden raid? Because, obviously one of the big interesting things that people bring up to me is the fact that in the bin Laden raid, they found a copy of Loose Change. For those that don't know, they also found Webster Tarpley's book, Synthetic Terror. He also had 13 Bloodlines of the Illuminati on the hard drive as well, all these different things. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what's that? I mean,
he's a big fan. No.
Well, I mean, I just wonder who that person was in that thing, whether those things were really on the computer. If they were, why? If they weren't, why were they included, et cetera? I mean, there's obviously,
there's so much of it that just doesn't sound legit. And like burying him at sea because they wanted to be respectful to the guy who murdered 3,000 Americans. And they didn't want to incite the Arab world, like invading their country and killing their people and bombing them. Hadn't done that already. None of it makes any sense. It's any logical sense with the explanation. And then a number of the SEAL Team 6 guys were killed on a helicopter raid. And none of it makes any sense.
Well, Turki al-Faisal, the head of the Saudi intelligence at the time, would fly bin Laden either from the Khartoum, where they had a pipeline company together with Cofer Black of the CIA. They'd fly into Iran and refuel, and then fly supposedly into some hinterland, with the northern province. And then they would go, Jamal Khashoggi would be there, and they would take a picture of him in these, garb getup, and then they're out of there. Right. And I think that's the whole school play nature of Afghanistan, and to justify the war. And people don't, like Jason was saying before, they just believe everything government tells them. They will do these psychological ops and school plays in order to get 20-year wars. And that's what they got out of it. They got 2 20-year wars out of it. They got the Iraq war and they got the Afghanistan war out of it.
And I'd say they even got more than that. I mean, look what we're doing in Yemen. Look at AFRICOM. Our military presence may not necessarily be major boots on the ground there. There are some, but our military equipment and our generals and our special forces are there all the time. Again, Rand Paul got it right when he talked about Yemen and said, it's our equipment and we're picking the targets. It sure sounds like we're at war with them to me. And it's like, yeah, it's exactly right. And on top of that, it's not just the warfare that's being laid out. It's the starvation after the fact. And it's the bad look of the president, right? Even today, like that video he put out, what is it now? Almost a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, where supposedly a bunch of Houthi rebels are getting rained on from death from the sky. And it looks like it's just a bunch of people from a ceremony that weren't Houthi rebels at all. I'm sure you've seen that video on the beach. And it's like, if you're going to, not only if you're going to do that, like, you better make damn well sure it's who you say you're doing it against. Obviously, I've seen some pretty horrific drone videos. The big WikiLeaks video is the one that really sent Assange over the top. But then after the fact, even if you're not in a position that you ordered that, you better damn well know what you're posting. Or after the fact, apologize, man. Like, say, you know what? I got this wrong, and this is pretty sick and disturbing, and I should do better. That's like,
I have such respect for Tucker Carlson for just saying that in the interview, saying, "Look, I demean these people. I called them blasphemous. I called them un-American, and I was wrong." And that took, a huge amount of courage and really made me just get so much respect and credibility for the guy back. Oh, hey, what's up, Bernie?
Hello. So sorry, I've been listening the whole time, and I just have to add in my own 2 cents on a couple things. Number one, I definitely would not start with John Brennan. He he has a lifelong career of lying under oath. So, I don't see him telling the truth. And I would actually take Tucker Carlson's choice of Alex Jones, who is documented calling out 9/11 6 months before it happened, and be like, where the F did you get that information from? Because regardless.
Well, hold on. Let me stop you there as an insider on that whole thing. Like, obviously I know Alex, but this is not a conversation we ever had. I'll just say that William Cooper beat him by a month and a half. Like, everybody's seen the clip of Alex Jones saying it. Cooper said the same thing a month and a half beforehand.
I don't know.
The Hold the Pale Horse is the one that got me into all this stuff. That was the book.
Well, look, I think Bill Cooper has his big problems. Like, a lot of people talk about
the driver shot. Yeah, there's tons of issues.
I mean, but listen, Behold the Pale Horse has some really good stuff in it. And then it has stuff that totally discredits him, like saying that the Bilderberg Group meets in a submarine at the Arctic Circle every year.
But that's a classic government agent where it's like 10 to 15% is the bang on truth, and then 75 to 90 or 85%.
I think he was just a guy that liked the attention, man. I think he was the guy that was telling some truth, and he saw the attention he got, and he really liked, like, for instance, the other big thing, and you'll like this, Jeremy, in the book that's just out of this world, is that he says he watched a videotape of aliens showing a hologram of Jesus being crucified. It's in the book. It's incredible. Like, so basically he watched the 7mm film. But I will say this, he was the guy that called out bin Laden and New York in June before. I'm also going to say that this is a conversation I had with Jones, actually, because I wanted to see what he thought about what happened to Bill Cooper. And you got to remember, they're both Texas guys, right? They were both in that area, that general vicinity. From the word that
later on in his life, Bill Cooper said that he believed a lot of the alien stuff was placed in with the Trilateral Commission stuff and the CFR stuff on purpose to try to like throw him. Like,
it was later he did that, but again, Bill Cooper was it true. Well, he
just said Osama bin Laden was about to be blamed for an attack. Didn't Alex Jones state that it was going to be on the trade centers, or gave exponentially more information than Bill Cooper?
Both clips are like 30 seconds long, and they're both pretty vague and bin Laden and attacks. And I think he does mention the World Trade Center, and like when Alex says it, attack the World Trade Center again and use their asset.
That's a major piece of evidence, though, right? So it's like, even if you stole the one part from William Cooper, or had the same source giving both of them that, someone else or the original source gave Alex even more information with the World Trade Center. Like, how do you
just not buying it, man? I mean, 93, the World Trade Center was a target and hit. It was all over the place that the World Trade Center was still a terror target. There was all those documents that still had it in the crosshairs after the fact. I'm not saying that like Jones stole that from Cooper. I'm just saying it was in the ether. In tech, those guys were both very.
I have to put down this fact from legal perspective. That is premeditated information, and that both of them needs to be investigated in the court, and who fed them this stuff, because it shows prior knowledge regardless. And if you're saying like it's either they just predicted, it's like,
well, no, when I'm saying I was there on.
Well, what about the X-Files episode?
What I'm saying,
the writers from that show, the script.
Hold on. What I'm saying is there was a network in Texas where there was shortwave radio, there was GCN, which is like, internet radio, very, very rare, where like there was just a handful of guys that were on the air in that area, and they were all listening to each other. John Statmiller was another person that was during that era. So all I'm saying is, from listening to the old school 90s stuff from them, bin Laden had been brought up. World Trade Center had been brought up. I don't necessarily think that anybody had direct knowledge of anything. I think that they were listening to each other and kind of borrowing from each other's research. Going back to how William Cooper died, for those that don't know, he got in a shootout with police. But again, I had asked Jones about that, and he told me, and again, who knows, but he said that William Cooper knew that he was about to be arrested for tax evasion because they'd come around and said that we're going to have to serve these warrants. He went down to the sheriff's office with his gun, and he said, anybody comes to my house to come and arrest me for this, I'm going to shoot. And he did. He killed a guy. They came to arrest him. He killed the sheriff, and then they killed him. They didn't ask questions. They unloaded on him. That was it. And
clearly had
well, I'm just saying that he was going to be arrested for tax evasion. And look, I don't know that Cooper had sources on. I think Cooper put out some good stuff. I think he put out some really goofy stuff. I think I think that a lot of people are ego driven. Also, I think again, you look at somebody like Robert Lazar.
He was also a pioneer before the internet when this was all VHS tapes, and
sure.
That's how I started with loose change. We bought a tower stack, and I used to run 10 copies at a time, and I burned stacks and stacks of them, and I'd put them all over Harvard, MIT, BU. Everywhere, every college in Boston I would go to, Emerson,
And look, before I did, those films, I literally, before burning DVDs, I was burning CDRs of lectures from David Icke or Alex Jones's Road to Tyranny, or really how I met the other Loose Change guys is that I was giving out discs of just raw videos of the demolition of the towers that had shown the squibs, that people didn't have those videos. And I had, a third and fourth video of the underside of the plane and the supposed flash, that whole let's roll 911.org thing.
Original footages?
What's that?
Do you still have all original copies of these videos?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Hey,
I mean, listen, I'm a info junkie. I have stacks of hard drives. I still have the original burned DVDs that were sent to us from C-SPAN that you could order. Basically, but before they had the archive site and you could just digitally download everything, you would go in for DVDs and they would burn them to disc. And so I have a bunch of the 9/11 hearings on DVD burned directly from C-SPAN. The other archive that I used when we got in was a thing called the Vanderbilt TV archive. And I encourage people to use it to this day because it's excellent. But basically, at all television from the 50s from the major networks. So I'd go through on dates and news stories and try to get these news clips, and you could order them by segment, but you'd only get like a short little bit. So you didn't even have the whole transcript of the segment. And so I'd put in my order for like 4 or 5 clips. It'd be like $137. I'd wait, I don't know, a week or two. All of a sudden, I'd get a burn disc from, which I was supposed to return. I never did. It's supposed to be a library thing. And I would get the raw footage from there. But the footage that I mainly showed to those guys before I would order from DVD were from the Nutella networks, Morpheus, Kazaa, basically a bunch of the peer-to-peer programs before LimeWire. Everybody was big on like LimeWire and BearShare. I was way before that. And I would literally...
Jason, do you understand you might have the largest, I guess,
probably not
of evidence for
I know some
the
people.
new commission?
They have been digitized. So much of this has been, some of the stuff has been
All of it
digitized.
has, and I'm guaranteeing you, in 2025 at this point, I bet probably 50% of it has been altered in some way. So what we should do is on September 11th, 2025, do a full day stream of uploading all of your original videos. But you need to record them first before it connects to the internet, because there's the possibility that shit's tagged and it's been expunged.
Well, listen, man, I've seen a bunch of the bad edited videos. The no plane people who will literally edit out the plane.
That's what I'm saying, though.
I didn't want to see this.
Of these videos
flown over the thing.
So you have digital copies, but on analog assets. So it's like a book, right? It's like you can't be altered. And that it's for all of the ridiculous conspiracy theories that have been put forward and come out since, that by reviewing all of the original footage and showing it all, it's like, well, here's all of the firefighters with the bomb blast happening, their testimony. Even though most of them are dead now, it shows that they're there. The different planes showing, or the of the plane angles showing that, oh, that actually is a plane, definitely not a hologram, or is it not a passenger plane? Is it a military plane? And that we need to pressure for a real 9/11 investigation and declassification. And the second major thing that should be FOIA'd is the Pentagon security cameras, because how did the most secure building in the world only have a couple of grainy freaking picture captures, yet somehow there was also a bunch of Israelis with a van that supposedly had explosives in it that were positioned recording it and seeing cheering. You know, it's like
those are separate incidents.
That's the issue.
absolutely. I'm just saying, like, for comparison,
really important
how
to
is
talk about, and there's a lot of issues with the Pentagon. I mean,
oh yeah, like it was closed under renovation, all of that shit. Obviously, it's a setup inside job. It's like, it's just so undeniable. But the actual video evidence of getting the security cameras of there, that I guarantee from at least one of the buildings, one of like the sites, there's
I want all the AMEC
video
who were there to testify why they were doing a $258 million refurbishment and none of their workers were in that part of the building when the plane hit. Why not? Why weren't they at work that day and doing this renovation and like overspeed? If I was a contractor, I'd be having my workers there every single Tuesday. I mean, Tuesday, yeah, every single day they'd be there working. It doesn't make any sense. And I'd have Peter Jansen, the head of that corporation, come and testify alongside Donald Rumsfeld's dead, right? So he can't.
No Rummy. Rummy's been gone a while these days. Look,
we can get his buddy there. We can get two of Rumsfeld's buddies. I'd like to see Peter Jansen, who is the head of AMEC Corporation, which also was a contractor who was hired to clean up the rubble and the debris at World Trade Center after 9/11. They were the first contractor on the scene, which is also suspicious if you're doing a cover-up of demolition explosives. So I want them investigated. And I also would like Dwayne Andrews of SAIC Corporation investigated as to, why they're basically the experts on nanothermite technologies. And a lot of their scientists wrote a majority of this NIST report, which was basically a cover-up, and how there was a conflict of interest there with
exactly. Literally 1,000. I bet you there's probably 5,000 different separate incidents of government agencies or people that did the exact opposite of the protocol on that day. And every single one of those needs to be documented and investigated, as well as every single sketchy business deal that happened magically on that day, such as all of Enron disappearing, such as all that gold disappearing, such as, like there's just so many impossibilities that all happened for the first time on that specific time, that in a court, in a real investigation, each one of those is an actual criminal crime that needs to actually see a court and be investigated. And
absolutely. And another thing, there's a lot of disinformation that's going around. It seems prevalent. There's a lot of bad research that gets propped up. I see a lot of this. Pam Bondi posted one file out of the JFK thing that said an Israeli intelligence service and then nothing else. It's like kind of like alluding to Israel did JFK. And there's all these people saying that Israel did JFK. And I've been researching the case for 20 years, and the closest connection I could find is that maybe Reuben Efron through, Angleton may have been like this connection, and that they're the APAC thing. But it's not a key thing, because look at John McCone. John McCone was put in the CIA director for Kennedy, and he was against all that. So there's all these conflicts in the story. But the same thing you get with like these people saying the 5 dancing Israelis are the one, and the Gelatin B art group are the ones that rigged the towers for demolition. That's just not possible. There's many other avenues. There's the Ace Elevator Company that did an elevator remodernization just a couple months before. That would probably be the main one I would probe. Second one I would probe is Turner Construction, which did a series of fireproofing upgrades in the towers on those key floors going back to the 1990s.
Jeremy, can you pull
and
up
the security company for the World Trade Center, which was Securicom Stratesec, of which Marvin Bush sat on the board of directors. And 2 of the guys that were the CEO of that company has recently resurfaced. Here he is on LinkedIn, working for another company called Eigerhawk Ltd. Really interesting. You know, he has a couple of activity on LinkedIn posting some praises about how George H.W. Bush came to speak at Lafayette College, where he got his degree. I wonder if Lafayette College has any student pictures of this guy, or any of the people that went to school with him, because there's no pictures of this guy anywhere publicly. And he lives in Spook Central. So it's kind of interesting that this is the guy who ran security at the World Trade Center, had the CEO of that company, because it's certainly someone I'd want to talk to in a new investigation and bringing this undercover. He's also on the board of he's an investor and an investment banker, and he's one of the guys that bought those put option stocks on before 9/11 on United Airlines, and so I would like to see that investigated again too. That would be a great place to start, because I'm sure he has a lot of knowledge about, that and the dancer is providing intelligence cover. Exactly. There's no way that they could have gotten inside the building and rigged these things, and it's a whole different group of characters.
That second
obviously had prior knowledge
stated,
and were sent there to film the event, but people are saying that these guys in the Gelatin B art students with the BB-8 fuses for bus bars, they had boxes for bus bars which can be used for wiring explosives, so therefore they were the guys who were who rigged the buildings. Maybe they
let me jump in on Gelatin B, because I got something that's really interesting. Probably most people aren't aware of it. Okay, so what you're talking about is the fact that the World Trade Center actually cordoned off these massive floors for quote-unquote art students. And Gelatin B was just one of the art student groups that were in that area. Since then, I've tried to find every single video by them, about them, after the fact. They actually have an art book out there that is worth thousands of dollars if you can get it. And we're going to talk about the photograph that's on the cover of that art book in a moment. Okay, yes, there's the E-team. What you're looking at is they were actually able, in the World Trade Center, to take one of the massive windows out without setting off any alarms. They built what you're seeing right there to stick out, and then on, I think it was is either the 91st or the 101st floor, go outside, and then this gentleman right here takes a picture. He actually hires a helicopter, and this guy named Josh Harris. Okay, he is the guy that commissions this guy right here, this photograph. And if you look right here at this photograph, that right there is the art student. Now, why am I bringing up Josh Harris? He is an internet mogul that basically came up with YouTube and video on the internet before it was a real thing. And what's really super interesting is not only did he do that, but he believes that the FBI is after him because of connections to the Mossad and 9/11. Well, he did a documentary film called We Live in Public. I cannot recommend this film enough. It is a must watch. So he had hundreds of millions of dollars at one point. He had a ridiculous amount of money. So, and by the way, this is going to get even more into 9/11 and often do a kook thing. So he actually builds this facility in the middle of Manhattan in 1999, where he is recording everybody in it 24/7. Okay.
Sorry, what's the name of the book? We Lie in Public. We Die in Public.
We Live in Public. 2009 is the documentary. Okay. And then like, if you see the cover for the documentary, it's all these people in little boxes. Okay. So an individual that I had met before We Are Change was a thing, when it was New York 9/11 Truth in New York City, before we released Loose Change 2nd edition, is a guy named Nico Haupt. And Nico Haupt is the progenitor of the no plane theory. Westcom, no planes, zero plane drills. So we're talking to him, and he tells me about how he's part of an art project. Josh Harris art project, big thing in New York City, blah, 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 blah. I have no idea what he's talking about. I watched this documentary, and Nico Haupt is one of the people in Josh Harris's experiment in We Live in Public. In other words, he's being surveilled by all these things all the time. Newsflash, Josh Harris is a little bit sadistic, so he hired ex-CIA interrogation officers and would put them in rooms with people like Nico Haupt. And in the video, Nico Haupt is in an interrogation room with this CIA officer in his underwear, and he is told to strip down naked, and he does. Just
that
balls
sounds
out.
Like some documenting of MK Ultra practice right there.
Very observant of you, sir. So what happens to Josh Harris and this whole underground thing is they had a large firing range down there and all sorts of automatic weapons. So they were worried that another Heaven's Gate cult thing was going to happen, and the NYPD raids it before New Year's Eve on 2000. It just gets everybody out there. But all I'm saying is that Josh Harris not only has a connection to the Israeli art project possibility and literally commissioned the photograph, knew the Gelatin Bee crowd, but then will be involved in a project that has the guy that literally started the no planes theory in like a mind control on video.
With the CIA
mind control. And that guy, he was in one of these videos. I forget which one it was, but he would go around to all the people that would, basically the Robert Grodins of Robert Grodin's the guy that sat in JFK Plaza and Dealey Plaza and handed out like, the truth for 60 years now. He was like 19 when it happened, like our age when 9/11 happened. So for JFK, but like a lot of these guys that would go and sit outside at World Trade Center and Ground Zero and hand out literature, right? And then Nico Haupt was kind of like this agent provocateur who would come around and like he was clearly like mentally deranged or being controlled by somebody to come out there and there's a number of these groups. You still see like the trolls will come around. I've seen a couple in the chat tonight of just like posting the same kind of disinformation stuff. And this is how they've made the truthers look crazy, and demonize the 9/11 truth.
Paid counterintelligence, just like Lou Elizondo is for the Pentagon.
Yes, precisely. Well, a little different.
He's a manager. Let
me also say this about Nico.
This would be like Lou Elizondo's hate group, basically. Yeah.
He also hooked up with Judy Wood, who, again, if I dare not bow to the direct energy weapon crowd and Judy Wood, well, let me tell you something about Judy Wood. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is why I just can't take any of it. Listen, before Judy Wood put out her book, I had read a lot of the white papers. They had been online. I'm willing to look at anything. Nico Haupt and Judy Wood did a video in like 2008, 2009. You can't find it on YouTube anymore because it was so bizarre, where Nico Haupt is in, again, his underwear. Apparently that's a thing for him.
And several MK Ultras documents.
He's in a giant pumpkin mask. And the disinfo loose change bastards, like Judy Wood's in the background of this video, and I mean, me and Jones had some good laughs over that one. I'm not gonna lie. But the guy, like you said,
someone pull that up and compare it to the first video of him in his underwear, because that's case studies of MK Ultra practice.
The highlight of the show tonight. I just wanted, for scientific people that are interested in the science, my friend Jonathan Coles is an engineer and a member of AE 9/11 Truth, and he does an excellent segment where he just debunks every single claim that Judy Wood makes about the towers. There's another great interview with her and Greg Jenkins on my 9/11 playlist on my channel. People can check out that Greg Jenkins interview as well, where he it's the only time she's actually done an interview with an actual scientist, and he just this is the one right here.
Jeremy, can I ask a question about I read a little bit of her stuff and saw her book and the vaporizing television antenna at the top. What's the explanation of that?
The explanation of that is it's just such a large building. It's literally an acre square. Is the like 1 acre of, if you were to take a cross section of that building, that's how big one floor would be in the World Trade Center. So what you're seeing is is literally the smoke. It's smoke and also concrete that's being pulverized. So there's a number of things. If it were a directed energy weapon, you'd probably see light coming off of it, because anytime you have a photon, it's E equals nu H nu, right? So it's the frequency is going to knock off electrons if it's a high enough energy to vaporize steel or do anything, and it's not going to be able to penetrate the inner structure, because there's something called the skin effect, where anytime you have a conductor, you can't penetrate the conductive surface onto the inside with an electromagnetic weapon. It's just
I thought there was some kind of nuclear device she was talking about that had a
there's a number of nuke people. James Fetzer was another guy that was like really came out. He's also been a Kennedy assassination kind of disinfo operative as well.
Him and another guy put out, because again, Fetzer was pretty mainline in the beginning, but he and Jack something or other put out this whole thing where they were saying all these photographs were fake. Let me just say this about that research, because I know what you're talking about with the spire coming down, and I also think there are certainly some questions on some of the cars that were extremely burnt out that don't seem to be in the major area. I'm not saying that it's just thermite or traditional explosives, right? I have no idea. I just, when I see the directed energy weapon stuff, I've studied, what's out there about DEWs, and there's not a lot out there, right? There's really more about, these large metal, the rods from God that are projected from space and come down. We've seen some of the laser technology shown on ships. You can actually watch that. And again, you'd only have to be in a certain light spectrum to say that. As far as a very interesting, quote unquote, light or possible laser on 9/11, you need just go to the second plane strike. If you haven't seen it, the close-up of the World Trade Center video just prior to the plane coming in, there's clearly what is a laser pointer, a large scale one, on the tower, right where it hits. It's moving around left to right. Have you seen that video, Jeremy?
So, Jason,
I don't believe I have. I'm just trying to find the video.
Bring it up.
Jonathan Cole in this.
It's one of the close-ups.
This is why I had to state that your collection of all the originals is so important, because it's the original videos, and if it's energy weapons, we would see distortions in the air around them, and if it's like a laser, it would be like it would have to be very large. You'd see melting sort of thing. The laser that you're talking about most likely would be the laser guidance of the drone controlled airplane or whatever it was, especially if that's exactly where it went in. And as far as nukes or mini nukes, that can pretty much be ruled out because there's no documentation of the massive spike of radiation that would have come with it, unless it was a different type of.
This is all disinformation, and it functions in a special way. I pointed this out before. The mini nukes thing is saying that there wasn't access to the buildings for a long period of time, so that someone could have just snuck this in real quick. And then the DEWs takes it to outer space, and the Star Wars program and all that stuff, which I've studied all that stuff. I know a ton about it. There isn't a lot out there. There is a lot out there if you know where to look, and find it. And